Shabbos, Shabbat Shalom. The menu for Shavuot is customarily restricted to dairy dishes. Many reasons are given related to the two themes of the holy day. Shavuot is the festival of the first fruits of summer. Thus, eating dairy reminds us that Israel is the land flowing with milk and honey. As well, Shavuot is the time of the giving of our Torah. And eating dairy reminds us that prior to this time, we did not have the laws of kashrut. Thus, the Israelites had non-kosher meat to discard and needed time to prepare kosher meat. So they ate dairy until kosher meat could be procured. There are many other reasons as well. And while the sages of old provide us with many interpretations to account for the practice of eating dairy, there is one that speaks to us profoundly in our grossly material world. Shavuot commemorates the giving of the Torah at Mount Sinai. The Torah is the governing covenant between God and Israel. It is the constitution of the Jewish polity. The revelation at Sinai marks our taking upon ourselves a religious routine that would, from now on, define our individual and communal behavior, to exclude certain behaviors that were formerly permitted. In the spirit of curbing our behaviors, we relinquish the pleasures of a meat meal. Our menu becomes a symbol for the meaning of the day. A dinner of succulent steak would mock the quest for simple life, which is the Torah ideal. At the outset of creation, God intended that Adam and Eve's children live as vegetarians. As we read in Genesis chapter 1, verse 29, and God said, "Behold, I have given you every herb yielding seed, which is upon the face of the earth, and every tree in which it is a fruit of a tree, yielding seed. You shall have it for food." Eating meat was not granted until after the flood, a mid-course correction dictated by human depravity. For we read in Parshat Noach, "Every moving thing that lives shall be food for you. As the green herb have I given you all. Only flesh with the life thereof, which is the blood thereof, shall you not eat." God set the bar too high. Rabbi Ismar Shorsh, former chancellor of the Jewish Theological Seminary, comments, "On Shavuot, we accept the roadmap to holiness. We remind ourselves of the ideal, to satisfy our hunger without taking of an animal's life, ennobles our shared existence." The essence of the Torah, then, is to create a life of self-restraint and not engage in doing everything of which we are capable just because we can. As the rabbis of the Talmud put it, we hallow our lives by giving up a measure of our freedom to act. That is, an effort at self-denial becomes a form of self-enhancement because a life of excess leads neither to virtue nor to holiness. The rabbis learned that the biblical injunction, "Kedoshim tiyu," you shall be holy, means to live apart, to separate from the profane and live a life of holiness. They challenge us to live a life with a degree of separation from the allurements that engulf us in order to focus the mind on matters of ultimate consequence. Thus, we celebrate Shabbat as one rest day out of 7 for the spiritual renewal that sustains us for the other 6. Or with kashrut, we deny ourselves many of God's creatures to impress upon ourselves the right of all animals to inhabit the planet. Nature surely does not exist solely to gratify our human need or greed. Reverence for land and for life is the attitude that the Torah seeks to engender within us. An everyday example of this world view, that less is more, is the rabbinic notion that the salt of wealth is its depletion. It's the idea that the way to manage our wealth is not to amass ever more, but to share some of it with the unfortunate. In other words, doing well is doing good. And in return, the principle will continue to grow. I have yet to meet a philanthropist impoverished by giving. More generally, Judaism demands of us delayed gratification. The final book, Moses and Monotheism, published just 1 month before the outbreak of World War II, Sigmund Freud offers rare praise to Judaism as the most spiritual of religions known. The key to that achievement lay in its rejection of immediate gratification. He writes, "The religion that began with the prohibition against making an image of its God has developed in the course of centuries more and more into a religion of instinctual renunciation. Not that it demands sexual abstinence, it is content with a considerable restriction of sexual freedom. God, however, becomes completely withdrawn from sexuality and raised to an ideal of ethical perfection. Ethics, however, means restriction of instinctual gratification. The prophets did not tire of maintaining that God demands nothing else from his people but a just and virtuous life. That is to say, abstention from the gratification from all impulses that, according to our present-day moral standards, are to be condemned as vicious. And even the exhortation to believe in God seems to receive comparison with the seriousness of these ethical demands. Thus, while Freud dismissed God as an illusion, he could celebrate a religious regimen that sought to elevate the faithful above their senses and lusts. Indeed, sublimation, the art of redirecting our passions for good, was a Jewish discovery. Freud's own highly disciplined lifestyle embodied the ethos of, not the specifics, he attributed to Judaism. In short, our self-imposed restrictions set us free. To scale the heights, we need to focus our energy. The awesome prowess of a world-class pianist or tennis player comes only with years of self-denial in other things to focus on training, practicing, and perfecting their skill. Even God, according to Lurianic Kabbalah, had to contract God's self in order to make room to create the universe. God had to restrict God's self. The intensity that flowed from such concentration filled the void left by God's withdrawal. Even as we scale down our diet on Shavuot to ready ourselves, the Torah, so too do we also go without sleep. On the first evening of the festival, we engage in all-night study. The moment that commemorates God's revelation finds us exhausted but saturated with Torah. Again, the ritual calls for an act that takes us beyond ourselves. To do without, to restrict ourselves, attunes us to the quest for the holiness grounded on self-transcendence. As we ascend towards godliness, we are more than halfway by the infusion of holiness from God. Holiness is a reciprocal relationship. According to the Talmud, if we strive to hallow our lives here on earth, we will be paid with the burst of holiness from above. A world awash in holiness awaits us if we but dare to approach it. Chag Sameach, Shabbat Shalom.